the possible questions. So good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm John Kodrowski, Project Manager for FNNBOA, and this is our last series of webinars we've been putting on. Since almost a year ago, we started out giving 12 webinars that resulted in 32 weeks of various courses, some ranging for 8 to 10 weeks webinars, especially if they were educational and directed. And this is our last of this series for the new fiscal year, where we have several topics that we're going to be putting out in the next, probably next month. So today, I want to focus on our webinar on the Northern Housing Technical Guide, or Technical Guide on Northern Housing. And we have two guests that are going to present today. First of all, I want to introduce Dr. David Fortin. He's a registered architect in 4 Canadian provinces and is currently the director of the McEwen School of Architecture at Laurentian University in Sudbury. Since 2005, he has taught architecture design, history, and theory at universities in the UK, US, and Canada, including various community-based studio workshops with Indigenous communities. He is a citizen of the Métis Nation and a member of the Royal Architect Institute of Canada's Indigenous Task Force. He is also an inaugural associate director of the Mahabwegin Research Institute at the Laurentian University. I hope I pronounced that right, David.
Mamozing.
Close. And then also is presenting and working on our project is Bruno DiLeonardo. He's a civil engineer, has been with the National Research for the past 30 years. Recently retired, but I think he can fool everybody. He's working more hours these days than probably all of us. After graduating from McGill University in 1980, he's for 2 years, he was involved in construction of 300 homes in a new Cree village up in the James Bay, Quebec. And subsequently, he worked the city of Westmount for 8 years in the building department, enforcing National Building Codes of Canada and other building bylaws. He joined NRC in 1990, and within the newly formed Canadian Construction Materials Centre, evaluating innovative construction products for building officers across Canada. We've been working with Bruno for the last few years on various projects, and we've been quite excited to being engaged with him on all of our topics. So I will turn it over to Bruno, who's going to give the intro, and then David will talk about his topics. So it'll probably be an interchange between them, and we're opening up probably about after 20-25 minutes. We use chat if you want to ask questions, and we can raise through chats the questions. If you want to raise your hand, turn on your video, raise your hand, and we can also ask questions that way as well. So, all right, Bruno, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, John, thank you. You mentioned that we've been working on this a couple of years. It's actually 4 years when I first met you and you came to NRC asking us to take on this project to develop a technical guide for Northern housing. And again, you described the role of FNNBOA, the First Nations National Building Officers Associations, and the fact that the guide was really something they needed for inspections and for procurement on First Nations communities. So we deal a lot at CCMC. We deal a lot with authorities having jurisdiction. So we do know the needs of building officials. And if you recall, we also worked on some workshops for your members to speak of building science and code compliance and that sort of thing. So in putting this guide together, addressing the issues in housing in the North, I guess there were 2 steps. There's the 2 sections in fact that I had to deal with, which would be the technical issues that they were interested in, but it was also the type of housing that should be built to address the the needs of the local community, and not houses that are typically built in the south. And so that had to be put in motion sooner than later, because I was envisioning a community engagement and consultation on the type of houses that they needed, the kind of house designs that they needed. So first off, I contacted Professor David Forte, who's going to speak afterwards, on this process in engaging local communities. So he did an excellent job, which took several years, well, 2.5 years approximately, to actually engage the community. He came up with a very exceptional process and broke new ground on how to go about engaging with communities. So he'll be speaking to that afterwards for sure. But then afterwards, I had to seek out and engage a consulting firm, an engineering consulting firm that had a good background in building science and, of course, construction in the north. And we work with Morrison Hirschfield, which is a longstanding building science engineering firm in Canada for about 50 years now. And this is the booklet that we've been putting together. And it's taken. It's not complete yet. All we're going to show today is an overview, and the booklets are actually being drafted as we speak, and hopefully they'll be completed by end of April, the latest. So the booklet the booklet list you have in front of you basically describes the table of contents of what's coming. And you hear me mention booklet and the issue in discussing with FNNBOA members and their advisory group. It was decided that it not be one massive 300-page document, this technical guide, but actually a series of booklets. So any community can, or any building officer can look directly into the booklet he's interested in and the topic he's currently interested in, and can, of course, download the whole package at their leisure. So the first thing we needed to do, of course, was define what we consider the north and what are considered remote areas. And after quite a bit of discussion with all the members, we resolved to show the way it's divided there at the top. And we have two main regions, which is the Northern First Nation region and the Inuit Nunangat region. And so we're going to have an introduction booklet that describes the region and the issues associated with construction in those regions and the challenges in those regions. After that, there's going to be individual booklets of each sub-region. So it was felt that the issue should be customized for each section and publish and present what's distinct with each sub-region. So when you start dividing it up into sub-regions, in the Northern Boreal sub-region, we ended up with another 8 booklets that divides everything up into sub-regions. And for the Inuit Nunangat, there's 4 more sub-regions. Yeah, if you can just go back a second, Claude, previous page. Yeah, so at the bottom there, you'll see the 4 booklets. They're going to be the overview booklets for Inuit Nunangat. And in the center there, you see the 8 the overview booklets for the sub-regions in the Northern Boreal First Nations sub-region. So that we'll be covering what's distinct in those areas, like the transportation routes in for summer and winter, the ice roads, and specific issues with their specific climate, specific geography, weather patterns, climatic issues and data. And so we'll be covering what you need to consider when constructing in those specific subregions. Next page. Okay, and then we get into the technical booklets, which essentially apply to every subregion. And but again, there will be some customization done for each subregion. In the first instance, in the first edition, there'll only be these are 11 technical booklets. There'll only be 11 technical booklets for two subregions, complete booklets for Northern Ontario and for the Inuit region of Inuvialuit. And but again, they will be essentially master documents which to build on to then customize for each other subregion. So in future editions of this technical guide, we expect to have these 11 technical booklets for every one of the 13 subregions. So the booklets are divided into, again, I mentioned 11 booklets addressing all the technical issues. First and foremost is the geotechnical related issues with site planning and foundations. So we explained the sort of things that have to be considered in the north. If you're, again, in the boreal region, it's different than the Inuit region. Inuit region has to deal with permafrost. In the boreal region, we have semi-permafrost and some non-permafrost, but again, very shallow frost lines. So just wondering, in this preparation, we explained the kind of foundations that have been built and have been performing in the north, in the north, with respect to space frames or screw jacks. And then we also get into more complex foundations, such as pile foundations and that sort of thing. And we explained the details that a FNNBOA building officer would need to consider and looking at these foundations and either be involved in the procurement of them and then the inspection of them. Then there's the center section there, part 2, which is the mechanical systems. And we get into the ventilation and heating and electrical requirements for typical housing and the safety issues related to that. In the ventilation, of course, we go towards the sort of ventilation that's required for having a healthy home and all the issues associated with that, and issues surrounding heat and recovery ventilators that are happening in the north, heating systems in the north that are typical with respect to also their kind of dependency on diesel and other issues related to their heating systems and the functionality of the heating system within the unit. And then we get into freshwater plumbing and wastewater plumbing issues that surround proper installation of these systems. Again, a lot of this is all based on best practice for these areas, based on a lot of other publications that have been done, but what we're trying to do here is bring it all together in one package, and so that FNNBOA building officers don't need to go and seek out other documents. So we're going to provide as much information as we can on making sure the essentials are there. There'll always be references to more detailed documents that can always be sourced and read further. Next section, we will hit the primary elements of the house with respect to roof, walls, and floors. So not only will we have details on how things should be put together, but also on recommended assemblies that we know are known to perform in the north, the sort of RFQs that should be chosen for the north, and how to make decisions on which walls to choose based on energy costs and other preferences in the area, and local limitations on sourcing of materials. Some areas we can show truss roof and they have no access to trusses, but so they always do rafters, as opposed to other areas that prefer using roof trusses. So we address those differences. And then, of course, we get into windows and doors and the structural framing. We're getting into issues on making sure this is a rigid frame. In the case of space frames and adjustable jacks, there is a lot of movement of the soil. And we will bring in some impacts on climate change and what to do to mitigate the effects of climate change on the soil and raising temperatures and impacting on the soil. We'll also be getting, of course, into interior finishes and that sort of thing for what's more suitable for the north. And lastly, we'll be getting into fire safety. And that's, again, something that's front and center nowadays after the years we've been having of increased wildfires. So in the boreal region, of course, wildfires will be a major concern, and looking at best practices for avoiding flame spread from houses from the woodlands. So that's, in a nutshell, that's the core of the technical guide with respect to the details that FNNBOA members sought from us. Then there's 2 appendices that will follow that will show designs, house designs that have been conceived in consultation with the Indigenous communities. The first set is for the Northern Boreal First Nation subregion, which Professor Fortin will be speaking to. And we're showing 4 of his designs that he worked out with in consultation with the communities. And it varies from some communities' needs, where they saw it for smaller homes. They had a need for smaller homes for the elderly, the elders. and then also multi-generational home where there's 3 generations living in the same home. And the next appendix is part 2, which is for the Inuit Nunangat region. And in this case, we worked with Alain Fournier, who's an architect who's worked with the Inuit Nation for some 40 years now, developing their housing and also engaging in extensive community consultation for these designs. And we'll be featuring 4 designs that have performed well in the north and in the Inuit region. And again, these 8 designs will be homes that basically are what emanate from following the technical guide details that we will be promoting. And so again, that's the extent of where the guide is at now. We're hoping, like I said, to have everything finished by April and with all the details. And this would be basically the compilation of the first edition of the technical guide, and we're hoping that it will be maintained in perpetuity in the future, and future editions will have the other booklets made for the other subregions that haven't been covered in this first edition. Excuse me. And that's it for my presentation, John.
Right. Excellent. David, I'll turn it over to you unless there's any quick questions. Anyone? I just sent a note out to everyone. While we refer to it as a technical guide on northern housing, and we have that line, the Arctic and subarctic, many of the communities in northern Canada and central Canada are also expressing interest to use it as well, especially on the windows and doors and some of the building structures that we're suggesting. So because it's northern guide, others are welcome to the usage of it as well. David, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, John. Thanks, Bruno, for the introduction. I'm just gonna see if this works. All right, is that working for you?
Yep, I can see it. And everybody on your left side who haven't used WebEx, there's a bar up inside with a squiggle and a couple lines. You can increase, zoom in and zoom out of the presentations as well if you find it too large or too small. So, okay.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. So again, I'm David Fortin. I'm the director of the MacEwan School of Architecture, and my role started with Bruno a number of years ago now. Just discussing, knowing that the technical guide needed to be developed, and Bruno had an idea to include housing design as part of the process rather than just kind of a bunch of technical details. So we embarked on this journey that was really, it took a long time to do it, but I think it really helped the process. So, I'm not going to dive, these first slides sort of just give you an idea of my approach to all of this and where I'm coming from. And a lot of that comes from the research I've done in thinking about architecture and design and their relation to Indigenous peoples. And, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People says that Indigenous people have the right to be actively involved in developing their health, housing, and other economic, social programs affecting them, and to administer them through their own institutions. And so, this is a book that I was very influenced many years ago by an architect named Christopher Alexander. And he's not writing about Indigenous housing, but I like to share this paragraph with you because I think it summarizes so many problems when he was critiquing just housing in general. He says, in short, the production systems which we have at present define a pattern of control which makes it almost impossible for things to be done carefully or appropriately because almost without exception, decisions are in the wrong hands. Decisions are being made at levels far removed from the immediate concrete places where they have impact. And all in all, there is a colossal mismatch between the organization of the decision and control and the needs for appropriateness and good adaptation, which the biological reality of the housing system actually requires. So I think, I don't know everybody's role on this call, but many of you have much more experience, direct experience with housing in communities than I have, and certainly many people in Ottawa and in the southern cities And so this quote to me just kind of summarizes what goes wrong when that kind of attitude is applied to housing. And the other thing that I've got highlighted there is this idea that housing is the biological reality of the housing system. I'm going to come back to that in a second. The issues that I really see with housing, you know, having taught and thought about this stuff for a lot of years, is that we made a few mistakes. Well, we've made many mistakes, but one of the biggest mistakes we ever made was the assumption that the house on the left would apply as a good strategy for on reserves and in northern remote communities, because the house on the left it relies on a whole bunch of things to happen. Of course, the suburban house in North America would have never existed if it wasn't for the car and the freeway system and the hardware store and the roofer and the sewage system and the access to clean water and the access to a job in the city that gives you an income to buy this house and pay your mortgage and then sell that house and then get a bigger house or move into an apartment. All of those factors, including the lawnmower, the storage of your lawnmower to the blender on your counter in your kitchen, was all part of an economic system. And that house is designed, it's a product that comes out of that system. And that's that biological reality of that suburban house. The typical single family suburban house has a biological system that makes it work. And it has worked okay, you know, up until recently for most families in North America, because that's the system that originated from. So the biggest problem and the biggest mistake was this idea that you can just take that house and plop it on a reserve because you cut it off from all of its lifeline, right? It's kind of like taking a plant out of the ground and you just snip off all of its root systems and put it in a different soil type. It's just not going to survive. It doesn't perform the same way. So we've got a whole problem across the country of houses that were never designed for where they are, and they don't serve the communities. I mean, there's a whole bunch of levels to this that I could talk about for a few hours, and I won't get into it. But let's just say for today that those houses don't work. So when Bruno approached me on this project, I put together a kind of a proposal for him based on my academic work, and I've been working for many years with First Nations communities in the States and here, and actually in Kenya as well. And so quite a bit of experience in working with people and talking about housing. And I did the little diagram on the right was just a drawing that I did to express what I was trying to say, which is, you know, you got to forget about the house as that commodity that's from the south and think about what is the life of a northern house. The life of a northern house has a different support system than the one that exists in suburban southern cities. So what is that system, and how does a house get designed that actually enhances the life in those communities? And you know, I guess that's always been my argument, that those houses are going to do a lot better wherever they land if you do the proper engagement. So we, in that early conversation with Bruno, you know, one of my first positions was to say that I'm a Métis from the prairies. I've never stepped foot north of Fort Liard in BC. I don't feel like it's my role to go and design for those communities. And so Bruno was very accommodating. I made the point that First Nations architects should be working with First Nations communities, and that does a couple of things. One, it prevents, you know, really well-intended architects and designers often get trapped into the idea that a First Nations community is to be studied as a kind of cultural education piece, and they barely get past that level in their design. And so there's a whole lot of cultural fluency that's to be gained from somebody. So I proposed working with 4 different Indigenous architects. All 4 of these architects are First Nations, and they all come roughly from regions or have lived experience from similar conditions of the communities that we worked with. We sent out a expression of interest to all the tribal councils within the northern regions that we had identified with an advisory board. The advisory board played a really important role in these early days as well. So Larry Jones, who's on this call, was part of that. Another group of northern people within housing, and then also some academics and others involved in housing. And so we waited, and we got interest from not as many as we would have liked. We probably had interest from about 8 or 9 communities, and then we just had to work through which ones were feasible and which ones fit our timelines. And these were the 4 that we worked with. So Fort Severn in Ontario, Bunabonabee in Manitoba, the Delaunay in Northwest Territories, and then Tahltan Nation. And these are just meant to be case studies to show what happens when you engage with communities, and I'll run through them very, very briefly here. We also encouraged those architects to, well, actually, we gave them a kind of itinerary, which meant that they would go into community for a minimum of 3 days the first time, and then go away and design, and then return back after a couple of months of design thinking and work. And research, and then share with the community their thoughts, and then get feedback, and then go back and finish off their design. So the idea here was that you'd spend 6 days minimum in community as an architect. None of this kind of helicopter architect stuff where they fly in for an hour and take some photos and then leave and go design a house. So a big part of this was, research. So this was Chief Paul Burke and council at Fort Severn worked closely with the design team here. Part of the deliverables was not just a design project, but we had the architectural teams produce their own research documents. So again, you can't design something for somebody or with somebody if you don't know what you're talking about. So even though they are First Nations architects, they each produce probably on average 60 to 100-page research documents looking at everything from education to economy, healthcare, structure, producing a book on that, and then designing their house on it. And then, spending time in community meant not just at boardrooms, but try to understand that community's needs. What are the cultural values? What are the rhythms of that community? What are the people doing there, and how can their housing better serve them? And it involved, a bunch of workshops. This one with kids. Brian Porter worked with some of the kids and got them drawing out their ideas about their house. And this to me is a really important aspect that I want to emphasize today, that having a First Nations architect arrive in a northern community, what that does is it inspires those kids to say, geez, maybe I want to be an architect when I get older and I want to design buildings, and how do I get to do that? So a big part of this for me is that housing should be thought of not just as somebody sitting at a desk and drawing a thing, but it's how do you get the community excited about the potentials to improve their housing? Because those buildings are going to get cared for better if you kind of create the right narrative around them. So they did a bunch of diagrams and the idea of adding on a self-contained apartment for an elder or an in-law, and then designed their scheme. Again, the workshops on the left. And so they do a series of drawings like this that really look at a different way to think about the lot. So a family cluster, for instance, people can share their trucks, kind of a shared drive space, and then have a cluster of homes, so a family unit, as well as thinking about space for their smoke shacks and other things that they're using there. So I won't go into detail in each one of these, but a lot of these houses have been designed very specifically for those communities. This one is Bunabonabee Cree Nation in Northern Ontario. So Eladia Smoke is an Anishinaabe architect from Northern Ontario, actually, but she's Northwestern Ontario. So this community was one that really was close to where she grew up. Councillor Tommy Winos worked with the crew on this. So again, looking at things like traditional land use, looking at hunting, fishing. A lot of people think, well, that's not really about a house, but I really think it is. You got to really understand what people are doing and how they're using their homes. So that's an example of their report. And then hers was the home that asked for this multi-family unit. I'm just noticing on this, Bruno's version has the stair moved, just so you know, we have moved that stair so snow and ice doesn't fall on that staircase on the right. But this was really important. The problem that ISK's had on housing delivery for so many years without proper engagement is they assume that every community has the same needs. And what this project really showed was that some communities wanted one single, small, tiny home basically for single males or single adults, young adults, and elders. And this one said that they needed multi-generational home. And that's the whole point of engaging with communities. So, this one on the floor plan on the right, you see a huge table, right? And in the kitchen, in the mudroom, you look right above mudroom. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's a huge butcher table here. So thinking about how meat is processed within the home, how is that meat getting in and out of the doors? Are the doors big enough? Do we have a big enough table to have a multi-generational family? Do we have an accessible unit on the ground floor so that an elder could live here and not have to go up the stairs to the other floors? You know, outside they're planning for indigenous species plantings. Thinking about all the things again about that support that family's lifestyle. And then upstairs, lots of bedrooms. So, you know, it's not a typical house that you'd see on a reserve, but, you know, if you look upstairs, there's a little seating room, there's multiple gathering spaces for different members of the family. Delaunay First Nation, again, Chief and Council, we're supporting this one. This was working with a really tremendous architect out west, Alfred Waugh. He's from the First Nation in northern Saskatchewan originally, but he grew up in Yellowknife. So this was a great fit for him. And so they went through and documented all the houses on the reserve, 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, analyzed them, what's working, what's not, talk to community members, spend time in them, you know, spending time doing, again, the things that the community does and thinking about their housing. And then they go through a really intense workshop of looking at each room, looking at the dimensions, bringing that by the community, talking to them, and then prototyping a bunch of different options through digital renderings. So they went through a lot of roof variations there to say, well, what does your community think about this? So do you like the flat roof, the shed roof? And they really liked this pitched roof that kind of reminded them of some of their tents that they use out there. And so the community chose that one to move forward with. You know, and then they've got an airstrip out there that they're thinking about reusing for their housing. So again, that involved a different kind of layout than other neighborhoods. And then they proposed also a circular one where the kids could play in the middle, and the community could be built around these kind of circular arrangements. And, you know, there's thoughts about storage for your truck, your ATV, snow machines, northern people necessities, I would say, that often get overlooked. And then lastly, the Tahltan Band. And the interesting thing about this one, this is in Dease Lake, BC, which we determined to be remote enough to be included because it's really difficult to get material in there and everything. But they did have road access, and the other thing that Dease Lake has is a lot of wood compared to the far north, say the Inuit and other things in other communities. So you know, they went through an analysis of their housing and saying, well, they should be using their local wood. And how do you kind of involve the community and the harvesting of your own wood for your houses? And so again, they did a youth workshop and then went through a design build of this, you know, heavy timber build and something that would resonate with their people. And there's just some floor plans again. So that's it for my talk. I just wanted to kind of share this and just emphasize again that, you know, I guess I'm biased because I'm an architect, and many of the communities we worked with here kept saying, you know, it's such a luxury. You know, nobody's ever flown in and sat down with them for a few days and said, geez, how do we design a house that suits our lifestyles and our people specifically? And I am really thankful that, you know, Bruno was to accommodate that request, and because I think it goes to show the importance of this for our communities. So I'll stop there. Thanks, John.
All right, thanks, David. Does anybody have any questions, comments, input? Larry, you're on the phone. We have a few people by phone.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Larry. Yep.
Yeah, would you like me to say something?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, because you've been involved in lots of these projects in the north, so.
Okay. I'll just back up a bit and sort of reinforce a comment, or I suppose something that we determined to be important in this process, and that's the idea of using the approach as written by Christopher Alexander in his book Pattern Language, which sets out a whole bunch of things that happen in traditional, mostly indigenous communities all over the world. So there's things that are said about in that book that become important. And in my work experience, they are important in our part of the North. I've worked in Nunavut, Yukon, Northwest Territories. I've done some work in Alaska. And a common theme is always the fireplace. So how do we bring that into a modern built environment can become a challenge. The current solution seems to be, in most cases, some sort of wood stove. So there's an idea that, now has to sort of be brought into the mechanical process. And then there's other activities that go on in the house that we ordinarily don't think about when we take the off-the-shelf design that works in an urban environment in the South. So there's other things that we have to think about. David kind of alluded to that, but I've been up in Nunavut years ago, 30, 40 years ago, and I've watched the people there go hunting seals or walruses and maybe a whale, and they bring a whole seal into the house to process when it's, say, minus 30 or 40. That's not something you would put on the kitchen table in your little condo in Toronto. It just wouldn't happen. So there's a whole different way of thinking about that, and how do we process it? Where do we store it? And it just completely changes the way we live and spend our time in the indoors. So it becomes really interesting when you're working with the communities. In my experience, we have worked with the communities on these types of things. Our approach has always been a series of visits over a long period of time. And in this exercise, when I'm on the advisory committee, we don't have that luxury of, say, 3 or 4 years. And we formally called it the Design Input Tour. And one of my favorite references always, and I'll just throw that out and I'll close, is that we had an interesting person work with us in the 80s when we were doing the Design Input Tour. And that individual was Harold Strube, and he wrote a book about his experience of designing buildings at high latitudes called Bare Poles. So there's a lot of information in there that can be distilled for a designer, and we're taking it to another level when we're generating these technical guides. And it's been fun. I've enjoyed it. If anyone has a question, I'm willing to answer, but that would be the end of my comment.
All right. Any comments, questions, input?
Yeah, John, this is Bruno. I was just going to add a little bit more to that discussion. Is that I like that that Professor Fortin wanted the team to spend 3 days with the community, because in this fly-in type of architectural designs, there's not enough time to spend the time with the local community and get them to verbalize what their needs are. Because I wouldn't think that Indigenous communities are adept at verbalizing their needs in the kind of terms that a designer needs to finish to complete a design. So it takes time to sit down and actually convert their needs and what they say they need into actual design parameters and that sort of thing. So there's time needed to actually sit down with the local community and help them along to verbalize what they'd like to see in their homes, and the kind of needs they have, dealing with their supplies, their foodstuffs, and how they source their food. One thing that Professor Fortin mentioned is typical suburban house in the South. We rely on supermarkets for our food, and there's no supermarkets up north. So you got to anticipate that, and the house has to accommodate their approach for their game and their food supply. That's it.
Okay.
John, it's Dave Kyle here from Morrison Hirschfield. One thing I think is important to note as well, and David can probably agree with me on this one. I have seen some really terribly designed buildings in the South as well that have nothing to do with what people want them to do. And it's become almost a not unusual kind of thing. I think the difference here that David and the team there have really flagged is that a house or any kind of building for that matter has to reflect the needs of the community. And the only way to get it designed correctly is to have your ears open and know the right questions to ask. And I think that's a huge learning curve for all designers. And it's even more important as you get away from the big centers, because in the big centers, they all talk to each other. But when communities are separated by, either transportation issues or what have you, getting that conversation going is much more rare. So I've really learned as an engineer in 30 years plus working in consulting, I've learned a ton from the work that David's team all pulled together on this project.
Thanks, David. Any other comments?
Hi, it's Kate from CMHC. First of all, thanks for inviting me to this. I was actually wondering what had happened to this project. I remember hearing about it quite a while back, and Professor Ford, I think you and I had briefly discussed your approach to this, and I really actually enjoy seeing this intensive engagement with the communities on a per community basis. My question is, what are the next steps with this? Has anyone costed the particular designs to see if these have to go to private market type thing, or if it could be funded through CMHC or ISC or CERNA? And secondly, is there intentions to do this on a continuing basis with the other the other communities in, I guess, across the north? So what is it, 33 and NWT and 26 and Yukon, et cetera, plus of course the northern provinces.
I'll just jump in on your first question, Kate. Yeah, thanks for your question. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to say that I think 3 out of the 4 of these projects have taken steps towards being realized, at least a couple of builds versions of them. So Delaney has taken a step forward, and that may actually be involving the CMHC. Actually, I'm thinking up there. Fort Severn has also been looking into funding models to get theirs going, and same with the Tahltan Nation. That one for sure is going to happen. The only one that we haven't heard much about is Bunnabonaby. So of the 4, it's exciting. That was the hope that, we couldn't promise anything that these would get built, but we said, at least you'll have kind of shovel-ready plans if your community can mobilize. So we're excited for the 3 of them. In terms of the future and the viability of how you can do this for more communities, and again, recognizing that everyone deserves it. I mean, I think that's beyond the scope of this. Maybe Bruno can comment. In some ways, I would love to see us be able to get some funding to do this with communities and just set out a 10-year plan or 15-year plan and just start going one by one and doing it, because it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I can probably address some of that as well. This is John Kudrowski here. We've been briefly talking with David, and so we're funded by and large through ISC and some regional stuff through CMHC, but we want to try to engage David to work with one of the tribal councils in Saskatchewan and form a group and come up with a number of plans, maybe 3, possibly 4 construction blueprint plans with technical specifications. In our consultations with our technical group that's helping to drive this, well, we discovered a lot of the blueprints that are being used are really out of date. They're not meeting the energy guide qualifications, that are just, they're very passé. And so we're currently putting together a proposal looking at having David work with a couple of these groups design 3 or 4 blueprints, including technical specifications, and then we make them available to others who want to use them. So we're in the process of trying to do that. This has always been a topic since my involvement of FNNBOA, trying to establish like a book that has better designs, better technical specifications that a lot of the communities can, gravitate towards and pick. And then we all have the comfort level that yes, they're been done by an architect, they've been signed off, they have the technical specifications, and we're confident, at least at that level, the plan is good to use. Now, we don't, we also need the inspections to follow up with that. But at that level, we're hoping to enhance that, given what David's been doing for us up in the north.
John, if I could just jump in and add to that, something that I was thinking earlier when Larry was talking, there's another whole part of this. We're working with a few First Nations communities in the prairies right now as part of the Indigenous Housing Innovation Initiative. And a big part of this is economics for me, and I keep on having to press that because part of it is thinking about the people that are in these communities and how they can create economic benefit from housing. That is a big part of all economies is housing. And if everybody's kind of prefabricating and building something from the south, it's not really benefiting them. So one of the biggest challenges I think in laying this stuff out long term, and this goes back to Christopher Alexander and many other people's work, is how communities can have some level of autonomy and have job creation and gain expertise and trades out of these shifts in housing. So that's first and foremost in my mind, is thinking again on how, when we're doing these shifts, is how they can tie into economies that benefit the communities. That's a big challenge.
Thanks, David.
I have so many other questions, but I'll just ask a couple if you don't mind. Was there one of the things with this whole modular piece, certainly what we're hearing internally is there's almost the two types of housing, and tell me if I'm off track here, but there's the incredible backlog. There's the immediate need for people today, for people yesterday, and then there's the contemplative approach to the future, which is what this to me it really represents. But I think that the rapidly housing type scenarios that we're seeing are trying to address the backlog in an emergency sort of way, which is very reactive, of course. So my question to you then would be: is there space in what you are doing to look at the almost two approaches, if you will, or what are your thoughts on that? I guess, because I agree it shouldn't be coming from the south or the north if it's not supporting capacity building and training and really putting the skills into the communities.
Yeah, my quick answer is exactly what you said. There has to be two approaches, because the problem is that for so many years that everybody sees the wound and everybody focuses on putting the Band-Aid on it, but they're not getting to the root of it. So the kind of emergency housing, that makes sense for emergencies. I like to often think about Haiti. When you have a natural disaster, that requires quick, immediate housing, right? Because it's something out of everybody's control. It's happened immediately and you have to address it quickly. That's like emergency housing. And that same attitude has been translated too easily to First Nations communities, because they see, well, housing is terrible, people are suffering, so we've got an immediate problem. But for me, it's like you can't conflate the two problems. One, the natural disaster, and the other is a political disaster that's been unraveling for hundreds of years. So you got to kind of go to the source and think systemically what led to that, and then rewire that for the next generations. Otherwise, you're just going to keep on putting on Band-Aids that are just going to get, because every community, it's still today, I'm just amazed at what I see. And it's not just northern communities, it's First Nations communities across the country where the housing going in, because they're given this number by ISK, and it's almost an impossible task to meet that number and give a good quality house. And you've got people that have business models based off supplying those things. So, if you don't break that path, and that's what the IHI project was about, is looking for innovative ways to break it. So yeah, absolutely, two different conversations, both valid, in my opinion.
Yeah, one of the challenges that we've always identified is while, you know, FNNBOA, we've been building the capacity for inspectors and training, making sure they're properly educated and identifying defects. One of the issues we have identified time and again, and probably being more vocal these days, is like inspectors, you know, we find poorly built homes, build them. So now the question is, how do we build the capacity of contractors? And this has always been a huge gap, and we're hoping to address it now. We ourselves, we're actually trying to provide more education to people who want to work in construction. This is how you get your training. These are the types of courses that are available. These are online courses. We're actually also introducing a FNNBOA YouTube channel where we can start showing through video how some of these homes are being constructed, you know, within code specifications and some creative ideas, so people can start sharing their videos in terms of the goodness that's happening in the communities. Because there are some good stuff happening. It's just nobody can find them.
I have a question about the whole energy efficiency thing, and I see Enercan is on the call. Hello. We had undertaken some work looking at the north and the proposed new code, which will take us to a near net zero. And I know from conversations with really good people in the north that some of that is completely unrealistic, and also some of the modeling that we did show that some of that is unrealistic too. And the realities of certain things in the north just are not applicable to code. So what did this come up in these case studies, and what was the kind of the consideration from an energy perspective, or was there an aspiration for that, or was that secondary?
It's Dave Kyle here from Morrison Hershfield. David, if you don't mind, I'll jump in first. As we were looking through some of the things that were identified, you can see the list of booklets that we have there. We have done some preliminary looking at how to maximize or further improve energy efficiency in the buildings. And some of the design options that we're developing in the envelope sections and so on and so forth are quite modern in terms of amounts of insulation and how they're placed. But we've also been very, very aware of the key issue of durability in housing in the north is probably the #1 energy issue related to housing. If we could get homes to have a reliable life expectancy in the 15-year to 20-year range, that would be a major improvement in total energy consumption of these locations, because of all of the costs in terms of energy and carbon in getting them built. So that was one thing that we were really conscious of looking at. The other thing that we realized is the math, if you're going to take that approach to energy efficiency of cost benefit, varies enormously across all the various regions. And a lot depends on the sources of energy. Diesel genset sourced electricity completely changes the maths from a location where perhaps people are using wood as a primary heat source, etc. So we've realized that one of the key things we really need to look at is designing homes that can be built that have really good energy efficiency in the context of how they could get delivered. And it's sort of step one. If we can get there and get that rolling, we'll then be able to focus on the key issues that come up in the future and target improvements as things move along. So that's where we've ended up looking at it over the past 3 years.
I just would add, if you're referencing the 4 projects, certainly that was a big concern for all of them, and there's kind of a variation in what came out of those communities. For instance, the Delaney project with Alfred Waugh, they actually engaged with a passive house designer and designed a kind of a wrap and rigid insulation, so kind of a highly efficient building envelope, high insulation and tight envelope. And yet, I remember Larry saying a few times, like the per square foot cost to do that up there is not going to be easy. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, there was a lot of conversation between Morrison Hirschfeld and Eladia for the Bunnabonaby project. And there, I think that the decision was to go with like a Mooney wall system, thinking about, well, what are the skills that are in the community? How do we design using materials and trades that the community have good skill set with and still achieve those R values? So there was a lot of that kind of conversation about, what are the aspirations? What's the actual price tag on that, the more remote you get? And then what are the capacities to actually build it in a way that it'll succeed? Because as has been mentioned by John, I mean, that's a huge consideration as well, that, you need to be able to implement these designs and for them to work.
Okay, any other comments? We're getting on to the 2 o'clock here, but if you willing to take another question or two? All right.
Okay, I have more questions. Nobody else is asking. Sorry, you guys are stuck with me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Was there communities that you've picked on, you kind of landed on one particular design, and you were saying in some cases it was for individual single men, let's say, versus multi-generational? Obviously, communities have more than one need. Was there always like a second choice? And was there any ask for, let's say, and again, I've heard this from certain communities, I've heard this from individuals telling me this, that a design catalog would be really nice, so that they can look in this and they can say, this year we know that we really need some more homes that are kind of more addressed for seniors, or we need more for singles, et cetera, et cetera. So on a time period over X number of years, they can kind of point to this catalog that they've helped to design to choose. Did you hear that?
Oh yeah, like that definitely there was a lot of those conversations. And so that early visit was, these were not the only needs in each community, I don't think, but they were determined. Part of the task was just to identify what is the most pressing need for housing in your community right now. Let's address it. But certainly there were conversations about other models that would suit those communities. So yeah, in an ideal world, you'd have a relationship with that community. And, that's part of what I'm hoping, right? That maybe these 4 communities, for me, they're kind of like case studies, because now they have an architect's phone number that they can call up, and there's a real investment on these architects that want to see better housing in these communities. So, building those relationships is step 1. So yeah, I think there's lots of room in each one of these communities for other versions.
That topic's actually been raised a lot, of some type of catalog that gives communities a comfort level, as well as possible funding agencies as well, a comfort level moving forward. So, again, we're trying to possibly move that a little bit by getting David involved under a proposal, working with a group out of Saskatchewan as a start for us. But we've always identified as a need.
John, Julia has a question, please.
Yeah, hi, Julia Purdy at NRCan, and I guess I had a question about the next steps for the documents and for the now I can't remember the word of the anyways, for the documents. I'm going to be a question. Are they going to be available for members or people that aren't part of FNNBOA?
Once the documents are done, we're going to be posting them on our website, and then make them accessible. So that will probably be April. I think probably probably mid-May realistically by the time they're all posted.
Thank you.
All right. I think at this stage, I want to thank everyone, David and Bruno and Larry for participating, and everybody who joined us today. Please keep watch our FNNBOA website for our updates, and we'll be set up a whole series of webinars, including a few webinars on the Northern Guide. Again, our focus will be, once the guide's done, ensuring that we build the capacity and we can do the knowledge transfer to the community so that we can use these properly. And so that will be a task all by itself, but we're looking forward to the challenge. So again, thank you everyone. And we have this recorded, and we can send the recording out to everybody probably the next day. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
It's really
Bye-bye.
nice to hear your voice, Larry Jones. Really enjoyed listening to you.
Okay, talk to you all later, another time.